Cool, okay. Hi, everyone. This is Max. I'm with the European Time Zone Meetup group, and today we'll be doing a reading of Patricia Lockwood's poem, The Arch. The Arch. Of all living monuments has the fewest facts attached to it. They slide right off its surface, no Lincoln lap for them to sit on and no horse to be astride. Here is what I know for sure. Was a gift from one city to another. A city cannot travel to another city. A city cannot visit any city but itself, and in its sadness, it gives away a great door in the air. Well, a city cannot, except for Paris, who puts on a hat styled with pigeon wings and walks through the streets of another city and will not even see the sights, too full she is of the sights already. And within her walk her women, and the women of Paris looking like they just walked through an arch. Or am I mixing it up? I think I am, with another famous female statue. Born in its shadow and shook foil hot, the facts slid off me also. I in the arch, we burned to the touch. Don't touch that arch, a boy we know got third-degree burns from touching that arch, says my mother sitting for her statue. She is metal on a hilltop and so sad she isn't a cross. She was long ago given to us by Ireland. What an underhand gift for an elsewhere to give. A door that reminds you you can leave it. She raises her arm to brush my hair. Oh, no female armpit lovelier than the armpit of the arch. So that was published in Poetry Magazine 10 years ago by Patricia Lockwood, who is a contemporary American poet who kind of got well known doing Twitter poetry of a kind. She was sort of like back in the wild, crazy days of Twitter when it was still sort of a new form. She was one of these like pioneering, like funny accounts. And she is also a poet and started publishing her poetry more after she got known on Twitter. And her poems, she has a kind of a range. I mean, she does some sort of funny poems, and then some that are less funny, like this one, although I think this one also has plenty of humor in it. It's not like a joke poem. It's, I don't want to say it's a real poem, you know, but it's not a joke poem. And she, a couple of years ago, put out a memoir called Priest Daddy, which I highly recommend. It was probably one of the best books I've read from the last 5 years. It's quite moving. But right now we're talking about The Arch, her poem about, ostensibly about an arch, but maybe not. So let's start at the beginning. A very good place to start. The arch. So Lockwood kind of gives different definitions, or she sort of dilates on this concept of the arch throughout the poem, but maybe we should just start and linger on this idea of the arch. What is signaled at the very beginning of this poem from the title, the arch? What do you think of when you first read that arch? There's several arches at play here, but what's the one that first occurs to you?
Well, I mean, I go straight to Paris and the
Sure.
Arc de Triomphe if someone's talking about an arch and a monument. So I may be ahead.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think that so you go for the specific monument of the arch being the best known arch in the, let's say, the Western world, the Arc de Triomphe in Paris.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think. I mean, London doesn't have an arch that comes to my mind like that. So,
ooh, marble arch.
Marble arch, yeah.
no, it doesn't. No,
I mean,
no.
lots of cities have arches.
Yeah.
Of a kind. I mean, the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin is like it's not quite the same kind of arch as the Arc de Triomphe, which is like, you know, is the arch par excellence, which is probably why, you know, when we think of the word arch, we think of that, because it's a perfectly executed in its shape and it's enormous. Any other associations with the word arch when you're first reading the arch? Caroline's going to a specific monument. Are people going to different specific monuments? In the American context, there's a very famous arch.
Yeah, well, it was not my first thought and first idea, but when I came to the second stanza, where it refers to city, I was thinking of St. Louis and the Gateway Arch.
Yeah, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, which is on the Mississippi River, built in the 60s, I think. Yeah, a giant metal archway, which is somewhat impressive if anybody's ever seen it in real life. It's pretty cool, albeit maybe a sort of complicated monument.
Isn't it also taken for famous food chain that use the arch for the M symbol?
There's yeah. I mean, those are the arches.
Okay.
Yeah. The golden arches are pretty well known too, especially in the U.S. And I think that's perhaps a fun connotation that can be played with there in that poem. Although she's also very much thinking about a European context, right? She's talking about Paris, and she seems to be thinking about a lot of the European art, which is a slightly more common form of monument in Europe than it is in the US, even though there's still a whole bunch of them. Any other associations with arch, maybe?
So obviously it's something that it's like a gateway that one could walk under and through to something else. Or if you stand under it, this is what I felt anyway, if you stand under an arch, it's rather enveloping, because it's over and around you in many ways. And you sort of gaze up and it's all around you. So I had those two things, gateway, but also at the same time, if you're underneath it's around you.
And also it's an architectural form that was used a lot in modernism. And in Barcelona, there are plenty of examples of the arch as a window form, doors, buildings, and a special arch.
Sure, the arch. That's good. The thing about arches is that they're absolutely everywhere, in lots of construction. Right, you probably pass under arches all the time archways without really even thinking about it, because arches can be big, like the one in Paris, and they can be very small and everyday, like the one that might be somewhere in your apartment building, for example.
Or also there's lots and lots of arches into beautiful gardens, botanical gardens, and things
Sure.
like that. You walk, so it's like stepping into another time zone or another, you know, like you go into a garden and there's a definite gateway to get into it, you know, like people have alluded to gateways already.
Right, so there's a functional architectural arch that performs some sort of support, decorative, but also maybe support function, and then there's the kind of standalone arch, which is the one that's invoked by the monument, which is this symbol of a door.
But it is a symbol of a door. Like what I thought about when I read that poem, because I've never been to Paris. So when I read it, I didn't have a picture in my mind, you know, that's how the arch looks like. But I thought about an arch usually, like, for example, like in my city, we have arches. They kind of signify a door, and you feel like you are going, when you go through an arch, you feel like you are going in a new space. And yet if it is a city arch, like, I don't know, on a square, it also is a metaphorical division because it still is the same space. So to me, there is a very interesting space functionality of dividing a space that is still the same space. So it feels like you're going into a new kind of dimension, and yet you are at the same place that you've been before.
Totally, no, that's a great observation. That's absolutely I mean, that's the kind of arch that Stanley's talking about when when there's like a little archway going into a botanical garden or something, right? It's supposed to signal that you've now entered a new space, even if at times the arch is standing alone and you could walk through it and then just walk around and keep walking through it in one direction, right? And never, you don't have to walk back and forth, you can kind of keep re-entering this new space that's articulated by the portal form of the arch.
That
I
kind
would
of
also say,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
The geometry, I just want to point out the geometry of the arch because it's round, and I think that makes a huge difference. Like the Brandenburger Tor is called a Tor, which means like a gateway, and so we don't have the geometry in the name. And the arch really signifies a semicircle, and that has a sheltering function as well. So it's not more of an organic form. So that's and I guess that's what we will find when we come to the poem later, especially at the end.
What I want to say is that what Tan just said really reminded me of the part of the poem where she talks about like the door in the air, because that for me is kind of a similar thing, that you can just walk around it and it would just be the same outcome. You don't have to walk through actually to get where you want to go.
For sure, yeah, and I think that's there's so much that's happening, like sort of theoretically there, or in this poem around the arch, this idea as Tom was saying of separating a space that's essentially the same. Why does space change when we just walk under a little thing? Like why is that? Is it just because is the arch actually doing something to articulate a difference in the space, or is this an expectation we have because of doorways, because of the associations we have with that kind of like portal architecture? I think that's something that the poem is kind of working through in a way. So we should and right, as you were saying, Susanna, there's there's something of the geometry that's included in the idea of the archway, and you're totally right that the Brandenburger Tor is not an arch actually. It's in its shape. I mean, it's propped up by columns, and so it has a sort of different feel, even if it's sort of monumentally sort of doing the same thing. Which reminds me that at least in the European context, a lot of these arches are, and why they're all called gates in Berlin, for example, is that they were built where where walls, ramparts used to be, and so they were built to signal that after they tore down the ramparts. The same thing in Paris. After they tore down the ramparts, they built this sort of the monumental gate there to be like, we don't need these walls anymore because we've either peace has been achieved or we've conquered everything. And so here's just a little reminder of the fact that there used to be a threshold here that you had to cross in order to get into another place. There used to be some sort of physical barrier that now we're sort of signaling with a different kind of structure. But let's get into this first stanza. Sorry, that's me. They're doing construction somewhere. It started first thing this morning. Okay, of all living the arch. Of all living monuments is the fewest facts attached to it. They slide right off its surface. No Lincoln lap for them to sit on and no horse to be astride. Has the fewest facts attached to it. That's an interesting, that's a provocative way to begin the poem. Does anybody want to dwell on that a little bit? Maybe parse that. Has the fewest facts attached to it.
I think that's true for me, given that I couldn't even remember Marble Arch in London. I think because it's there in the air. It's a living monument. It kind of becomes of no interest why it was there or what battle it was put up to symbolize. It's just there as a living entity in itself. That's what those lines are saying to me anyway.
Right, that's consistent with kind of what with our discussion so far of arches as sort of you know, being a form that you can get in lots of places, to the point that they're not always that special, and some people don't even have an arch that comes immediately to mind. Anybody else want to gloss this this
Yeah.
line?
Could we do a ModPo it? It says, of all living monuments has the fewest facts attached to it. And then she doesn't tell what the it is actually. You see, they slide
Right.
right off its surface. And then here's what I know for sure. So she might be coming to, she's going to zoom in on what the it is, I think. But it's not one of those monuments for sure. One of those big ones we just mentioned, the Portal Monument. So I think we should look at the it.
Right, monuments is plural, so it doesn't really work, but it must be the title, the arch.
But
It's
it's also
interesting.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
keep going.
Go ahead, Tom, please.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's interesting how grammatically it's done, because it doesn't start with a subject. It just starts right at kind of, let me open it up again. Of all living monuments has the fewest facts attached to it. So she kind of, to me, it's an interesting way to start, because on one hand, it connects, again, like as a bridge or another monument to the title, which I just find fascinating. It's like, let's use architecture in the poem itself, why not? But on the other hand, it almost is like expected of you to figure out which arch it is, which I feel like this poem plays a lot with expectations and what is kind of expected of you as a tourist, expected of you as an arch, expected of you as an architect, or what have you. So in that case, it's both kind of like, let's connect the title and the poem, and also let's create an expectation on what kind of thing we're actually talking about. So just like grammatically, it's a very interesting trick.
I mean, she also defines it by the things that it is not in the first stanza. So she's coming there. I agree with you that you have the title, and then you have an introduction that is a bridge, and that is a great observation. And then she says, here is what I know for sure. And then she points it out. But I think we are already making that connection that it's the Arc de Triomphe. I mean, because I guess, well, we cannot, because we haven't read ahead, but I guess the next moment when we come to the second stanza, we have made the connection. So it's kind of gliding into making the connection. Maybe it's already there, maybe it's not. It's not quite sure.
Could we look at the very last word, the arch, the capital? And it seems to me that she's showing that, like an architecture that Mac mentioned before, it holds up, it's functional. It seems to me she's mentioning her mother as the door she came through, and also as the support for her, because it's capital, the arch. And it's also a definite article. It's not an arch, it's the arch. Right. So I think it's very connected to the last word. She brings us back again.
For sure. And in that way, there's a sort of like bookending. Lee, did you have something to add?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, because Suzanne, I think you said like the first part is for you about the Arc de Triomphe. And I was more thinking it was about the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, because it has the fewest facts attached to it. They slide right off. It's the material. And then the facts, I thought it might be like a criticism on why it was built.
What kind of criticism do you think that might be? Yeah,
because you're celebrating something that might should not be celebrated, like the Louisiana Purchase and like the gateway to the West, that whole idea.
Sure. And that you're bringing us into the, I said earlier that the Gateway Arch in St. Louis is a complicated monument because exactly for that reason, it's celebrating it's celebrating the fact that St. Louis was the gateway to the West, so to speak, in the 19th century. It was an important, it was like the last outpost before the frontier. And so it was, and in some ways that monument is commemorating the city as a sort of site of manifest destiny, and these kinds of like American imperial projects. So for sure, there's plenty of ways to criticize the what the Gateway Arch in St. Louis is meant to represent. While at the same time, I think the Lockwood is making an important point here at the beginning. So so I don't think it's clear which arch it is. So for some people it's Paris, right? It could also be the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. I mean, it seems to be maybe one of those, right?
So if I just think of the Arc de Triomphe, which I have been to once, I'm struggling to visualize it in detail, but I have been to arches. I think it's the Porta Nigra outside the Colosseum, and if you look at that, that is so full of detail all over its surface, which is all telling stories. I can't say for sure, but I suspect the Arc de Triomphe has got lots of relief on it, telling stories as well. Whereas I haven't been to the St. Louis one, but I've seen pictures of it this morning. And although it looks huge, very tall, it actually looks quite nice to me, but it's very plain. I didn't see a very close-up picture, so there might be relief on that, but it just looked a plain arch. So if we're talking of facts, I envisage the facts, if there were the facts behind the building of it, of which there was a lot of controversy, they would slide down this huge arch. I'm trying to get a picture there. Whereas the facts of not all arches, but some arches are absolutely inundated all over the surface. So it might back up, rather than being Paris, possibly, it might possibly be this slippery, concrete looking structure. It's probably not concrete, but you know, whatever it is in St. Louis.
It's made out of metal.
Is it?
Yes, and there's zero adornment on it. There's nothing, no engraving or anything. It's this metal structure, this kind of wonder of modern engineering, with nothing symbolic on it whatsoever, nothing representative, nothing that signifies anything. So I think, I think in some ways this poem is about a specific arch. I think in many ways it's really about arches in general, but if we were to say that it's about a specific arch, I would say it is about the St. Louis Gateway Arch, because for these exact reasons that are being brought up, that it's and also because Patricia Lockwood grew up in the Midwest. But she's problematizing monumental architecture in a way that seems specific maybe to the history of the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. And I'm about to send around a photograph so we have this sort of visual comparison here.
Max, I agree with both of you. When you read it without that cultural knowledge, you don't get it right away. But I mean, I've seen pictures of the art, but it's not so significant in my mind, so I haven't made the connection. But once you get into it deeper, of course, it's that arch. And because it also has the no Lincoln lap for them to sit, it's a stereotype, kind of an American stereotype that's the answer, so that informs us just as well.
It's right. She's immediately situating or positioning this arch in the context of American monuments, like the Lincoln, the Lincoln Monument in Washington D.C., which is the Lincoln lap. This is like, some of this is like a very American specific context. So if anybody has questions, like, please, we can slow it down and talk about it. And that's why I wanted to send around this picture. One moment, Caroline, I'm going to just send this picture around, and then. Okay, I just sent it in the chat. So that's just the picture on Wikipedia of the Gateway Arch, so you can kind of get a sense of what it looks like. And I'm going to hedge all this by saying that I also think the poem this is not like a poem about the Gateway Arch. I think the Gateway Arch might be a starting point, and I think there's a good case being made that it is a starting point. But I don't think that the poem is about that arch.
Also, hey, Max, I think I just went back and read the poem again, and she doesn't really mention Paris until the second part, and then she talks about the hats and the pigeons and the, you know, lots of things that would make it not be the Paris Arch. It's more the St. Louis Arch.
And
Reading it again, yeah.
for sure. And Caroline, did you have a question?
No, I comment really because I kind of stumbled over the Lincoln Lap and thought, oh, I don't know what this is. This might be very significant to the poem. What's that, Suzanne?
That's a Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah, the
All
Lincoln
right.
Memorial.
That's also interesting because it's so much cultural knowledge that I personally, as a German, do not know. And that Lincoln Lab is the name that you just mentioned, Max, for that memorial, Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. I just Googled it real quick. And I think that's fantastic that she built that all in. I mean, it's not for everybody to understand, at least not for people who do not have that knowledge, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about it.
I think you're right that there's a certain amount of like cultural knowledge that's being played on here. I just posted a link to a picture of the statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. So you can get a sense of that lap that she's talking about, because I think it was probably fashionable at a time to crawl up into Lincoln's lap. I'm pretty sure you can't do that anymore, because all American monuments have gotten a lot less fun in the last 20 years. But I think that she means to, right off the bat, she's situating the archway that she has in mind in the context of American monuments, like the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. But I think that she's also in these first lines here, she's also making a different kind of more abstract comparison by comparing the arch, perhaps the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, which is, as we were saying, is sort of, as I think Chris was saying, it's a kind of slick thing that nothing could cling to it, right? All the facts would slide off, anything would slide off. So I think she's making a comparison between that arch, or maybe arches more generally, and the Lincoln Memorial, which is a different kind of monument. Does anybody want to say like maybe what that comparison is she's making? Maybe there's like an abstract, a sort of second order comparison that she's making between these two different kinds of structures or monuments.
Well, I would say it also helps us understand which arch that it is. It doesn't say anywhere that it is the St. Louis Gateway Arch. And Max, you said probably she had that in mind. Didn't you also say that it's close to the Mississippi?
It's on the Mississippi, the banks of the Mississippi.
On the Mississippi. Okay. When I hear the Mississippi, what I associate with the Mississippi is slavery. It was around the Mississippi, and what do we associate with Lincoln? He was the one who freed the slaves. So I think that is the relation between these two, Lincoln and the Gateway Arch in St. Louis.
For sure. I think that there's a historical linkage for that's totally happening, by association, but being like, what's another famous memorial? It's to Lincoln, the great emancipator. But I want to get at a more abstract. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I'm thinking, Max. This is a bit out of the box, I suppose, but I'm thinking if I'm sat on Lincoln's lap, I'm sat on a father figure. I'm almost sat on a human being. It's not stone, but I feel as if I'm sat on a lap. If I'm sat on a horse, that too is alive, and it's responding to me. If I'm looking at this, particularly the St. Louis Arch, it's just a thin arch. I don't get the feeling of life in it. That might be nothing to do with the poem at all, but it's just a feeling I have. Yeah.
You're entirely on the path that I was hoping to lead you onto.
Yes, but on the other hand, Lockwood is personifying everything. Can anybody comment on living monuments? Of all living monuments, can monuments
mean-
be?
I mean, yeah, they are living though, right? Like, this is something that we just like studied this semester, or we're like talking rather about this semester, about like living monuments, and that monuments are not static, that their meaning changes, the way that we interpret them changes, our relationship to them changes, and therefore any public space really, but especially like monuments, when it comes to them, they're not static, they are living in, you know, which is why we recontextualize them kind of over and over. But what is interesting to me here, and I think I would echo Chris's statement, is that, or rather like idea that when you look at the arch, the St. Louis arch, it doesn't signify anything unless you know the history of it. And when you look at the Lincoln Memorial, it is very personifiable. Like there's a specific person whom you know, and or rather like whom you know about. And so there are already some historical facts, some, I don't know, context that you can get just from looking at the monuments. So there are like a lot of facts embedded into it just by nature of it. And with St. Louis's arch, it's just a shape. So it almost like, it almost resists being contextualized by the nature of it, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, that's spot on, Tana and Chris. This is exactly the distinction I want to get at. That the one that I think is being drawn here at the very beginning is two different kinds of monumental architecture. One that is meant to represent, is representative of specific historical figures or anything. I mean, it tends to be of people. And then the other kind that is abstract, right? And that has it doesn't really represent anything.
And then as a strange one, we had an incident, which was a Black Lives Matter incident in a city called Bristol, where the statue was of a former slave owner and was pulled down into the river, and all hell went on, and it went to court, and controversially perhaps, the jury decided, I think against direction, that the people who pulled it down were completely innocent. But the thing was, there was a big talk about this, and one of the big things is that, as you know, unless it's something like the Lincoln Lap, most statues of horses, people, or whatever are just completely walked past every day, and nobody knows what the heck the plaque says. So there is an element of the horse and the person being stoned but alive. But on the other hand, unless it's something very famous, most of us are just walking past these things and see it. We haven't got a clue what it is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's also like that's in some ways the tricky nature of public art, is that you kind of see it, you might not know what it is, and its significance in one way or the other might be completely lost on you. Geez, sorry, this drilling is driving me nuts.
I can't hear it.
I think no, we can't hear it, Max.
Okay, good. Okay, because
I think she's making quite a play with living monuments, isn't she? Because she is taking, as Chris has alluded to, she's taking it away from being this sort of stone edifice that people sort of don't notice anymore. And she's saying it's a living monument. It doesn't have any facts, and it's not got Lincoln's Lap, and it's not got a horse. And then she says, here is what I know for sure. And then you want to move on to the next stanza to find out what it is she is going to tell us about it.
Right. She wants to, in a way, try to attach the facts or as Tan said, or to paraphrase what Tan said, contextualize this form in a way that some sense can be made of it, because there's no immediate eminent sense to it the way that there is in a statue of Abraham Lincoln, for example, where you see that and you're like, ah, yes, that must have been a great man, because they built a like 10-meter tall statue of him in this like shrine in the nation's capital. so the facts kind of they're all sort of dripping off of him and falling in his lap or something, right? But with the arch or with archways in general, you can't quite do that. I mean, something like the Brandenburger Tor in Berlin, it has like extra statues on it. And as we said, it's not entirely an arch, but it has like, these kinds of conquering figures. So you can kind of piece together what it's about. But something like the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, or just the form of the arch, the arch as a form resists that kind of that sort of easy interpretation, because it is an abstract form. It's geometric, it's architectural, it's functional in some ways. And so it doesn't have this immediate meaning. So we should now turn to Patricia Lockwood to see what she knows for sure about this arch,
But that's
or arches in
interesting.
general.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't notice it before, but when we were talking about arches and meaning, and also like the recontextualization of arches, she also kind of replicates the arch in the poem itself by the position of the line, "I know for sure," because she creates the form of the arch within the poem itself. And I find it kind of fascinating. Again, like she criticizes she criticizes an arch or the concept of that specific arch. We can look at it at different angles. And then she replicates it in her poem.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the second time she does that. Because the first time is the first line, she bridges the title in the body of the poem. And then she bridges the first stanza and the second stanza. But in that specific instance, it is very visible by the kind of nature of kind of the shape, like the actual like visible shape of it. So there are also arches all over the poem. And then if you look at the poem again, like there are geographically a lot of arches. So there's the concept of the arch, there's the Arch of St. Louis, there is arch mentioned in the Paris arch. So we're kind of like all over the place geographically, but the shape continues.
That's
I want
a great observation. Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to a living monument, and if you just zoom forward and say this is a metaphor for her mother, then you can see how she explores this metaphor by writing about what a monument is, and the whole poem is just an exploration of that metaphor. And I find that very interesting, because usually you use the metaphors for something, but not making it the theme of your poem. And that's something that I find very intriguing in this poem.
Would you say it's a concrete poem?
Like a poem where she...
Oh, a concrete poem. Look at this.
Yeah.
You have the first arch, then here you have the second arch, a third one, a fourth one, a fifth, and a sixth one.
Yeah, that works.
Sorry, Mark, I muted you by accident.
Was it me? Or is it too far-fetched?
No. I think that's in line with
right?
what Tom was saying, that there's a shape of an arch that Patricia Lockwood is very consciously producing throughout this poem, both perhaps in this kind of concrete poetic way, where you can kind of see the arches when you turn to the side, which is really cool, and also semantically, like there's.
But you also have to surround. If you look at it dead on. The line, like, damn it, how does that go? I know for sure. Like, here's what I know for sure. The position of the line, I know for sure, for me, already kind of creates an arch if you look at it just dead on. So here's that. And then, Mark, when you turn the poem around, and there are, very kind of visible arches. So I think it echoes what Suzanne just said about Patricia keeping to like explore, kind of toying with the metaphor almost, and like exploring under different angles and how you can turn that metaphor around, and then you can also turn the poem around and see the arches.
It's like turning inside out. She turns it inside out, and I find that very interesting. like formally she does it. So she really looks at the structure. She incorporates the structure. It's not a method. It's like doing it. It's a piece of art, so to say. That's really nice.
And it actually looks like there's arches on the other side of the poem too. I'm looking at it. And
Yeah, you can kind of start seeing them everywhere, huh?
yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
For the first stanza, we said Lincoln Lab. That refers to the monument in Washington. But why does she write lab with a lowercase l? There are statues of Lincoln all over the US and also in some other cities. So it could be any Lincoln statue. And a lot of tourists go to these statues and they sit on these slabs. So again, she's still unspecific. She isn't specific about the arch. She doesn't say which arch it is. She doesn't really say which statue of Lincoln she refers to. She talks about a horse, probably that's also a statue. Usually war heroes are represented on horses. Probably that's what she has in mind. And it doesn't say anything about the person who is sitting on it and who is the real statue.
Right. There's a kind of there's this sort of absent person there in the case of
it's unspecific, right?
The horse, yeah, for sure. I think for me, really, she's really trying to draw off this comparison we made a couple of minutes ago, where there's two different kinds of like monumental forms. I mean, there's obviously more than that, but she's trying to like do a binary here and be like, okay, there's the representative kind, the kind that means to embody, personify something, usually in the form of an individual, and usually in the form of very specific kinds of individuals, individual people. And then there's the kind that is abstract, which the arch is one of the oldest kinds of abstract structures of that kind. Although we will also see the cross later. The cross is a bit more complicated. But for now, how about we look at the second stanza, the arch, to fill in the antecedent here, which is something that the poem cleverly asks us to do with these first two stanzas. The arch was a gift from one city to another. A city cannot travel to another city. A city cannot visit any city but itself. And in its sadness, it gives away a great door in the air. And there's a lot to deal with there. And then we have the personification of Paris, which completely starts to complicate the binary from the first stanza. But for now, we have the arch, the arch as a melancholy form, which is an interesting thing. So at the beginning, Patricia says, well, the facts slide right off of it. This is you can't really attach anything to this. And then the second one, she says, well, actually, arches are fundamentally sad. And that's just what I think, which is such a funny way to approach the arch, which is, I think, as we were saying in the first part of this conversation, the arch tends to be a victorious form. It tends to be built where some kind of conquest has been made, or to memorialize some kind of conquest. It tends to have a strong militaristic history to it. So here she's immediately saying that. Well, she's saying it's a gift from one city to another, which I'm trying to think of an example of that.
Can we travel from? But I think that we're just going a little bit wild. And the poem, if you look at it like this, and we're looking at a gift from one city to another, always keeping in mind the idea of lap. Lap is very important, because if she's sitting on her mother's lap in the last line, you would see the armpit. So she wants us to have lap in mind. And also one city to another. And then in the third stanza, she says, she was long ago given to us by Ireland, which is her mother.
Yeah.
So she's looping from a gift from one city to another onto this person, which is, I think, her mother. And I think she has the idea of lap from the first stanza, looping over like an arch to the last part, which is the arch, her mother, I imagine. Because if you look at it like this, it goes from the first stanza to the last as a kind of an arch as well, with the ideas,
Sure.
lap, gift, and the gift from mother from Ireland. You see, within
Right.
the stanzas.
Well,
So is-
what's the other female statue that they're talking about? Are they talking about the Statue of Liberty, which was a gift from Paris to
Yeah.
What was it, Paris or France?
Yeah,
France?
France.
Well, I also had the Statue of Liberty in mind, but it was not a present from a city, but a whole country gave that to America.
Yeah.
I think
What was it, Paris? The architects they were from Paris, and they were experimenting with the Eiffel Tower.
I think it was from France. Like, I don't think it was from a city. It was from the nation of France. I think city country might be getting a little bit like muddled here. I'm trying to think of maybe a specific example of what she means when she says that a gift was a city from one city, or the arch was a gift from one city to another city. Like, is there? I don't know. Nothing immediately comes to mind for me. Although Mary has already started to kind of gloss that with evidence within the poem about as the arch gets personified in the form of the speaker's mother. This history of the mother's immigration kind of gets built into that.
I think the Statue of Liberty is a great idea. The St. Louis Gateway, it's a gateway, the Gateway Arch, and the Statue of Liberty also is a kind of gateway. It symbolizes a country of liberty. It symbolizes immigration. It welcomed immigrants that came to New York.
Sure, yeah, and it has a kind of different function. Yeah, I mean, the Statue of Liberty.
Facts attached to it. Facts
It has facts are attached.
Then we get back to
Sure.
the first stanza. Stanley was talking about the female statue, the famous female statue. When we continue reading, we read about the cross, and there's also a monument, a sign for Christ, and she said that she's not the cross. I was first thinking of St. Mary as a famous female statue.
Sure, I mean,
and I'm sure we can link these ideas to what Mary told us.
And if any, I think that's a provocative reading too. I mean, thinking of statues of the Virgin Mary, which is probably, going out on a limb here, but I'm thinking probably right, is probably the most common statue of a female person in the world. And it has a strong, I think that kind of gets tied back to the Ireland thing too, to the history of Catholicism. But how about for now we close read these lines here. A city cannot travel to another city. A city cannot visit any city but itself. And in its sadness, it gives away a great door in the air. A city cannot travel to another city. A city cannot visit any city but itself. And in its sadness, it gives away a great door in the air. This is such an incredible definition of an archway. I don't know if it's actually like, accurate, but it's clear that, like, the arch has provoked this rather lovely, like, poetic dilation here about the inability of a city to visit another city, and in its sadness gives away a great door in the air. Like, what does that mean? What's going on here? This is like, I absolutely love these lines. I really like this poem too. And I absolutely love these lines because God, it's so true. A city can't visit another city. What a sad thing. Like what's
The whole poem, the whole poem is full of personifications. I think already that is striking.
for sure, for sure. And I think
Living
that
monuments, living monuments. The city become living monuments. What's a gift? We give a present to someone. It's also something human. That's already a personification. Traveling, visiting. Who can be sad? Humans can be sad.
that's a great. I mean, for a poem that starts from a place of fascination about the absence of personification, the poem starts like whoa, arches. You ever think about like how it's not like statues of people? And then she's immediately like, oh yeah, but arches are so like, you know, they're so personifiable. You can't think of them without personifying, right? Like and then suddenly the cities are people, and then you know, a couple lines later, the city of Paris becomes is personified in this character, this sort of flaneuse who's walking around and being Parisian, I guess. But I mean, what's this idea of like one city can't visit another city? I mean, what does that mean? What are the stakes of that kind of idea for a poet, for example? This idea of a place being unable to visit another place, of being unable to inhabit something else. Like that's are there? Does this mean something in the writing of poetry? Is there a meta-poetic angle maybe here? Are there stakes for Patricia Lockwood as a poet about this?
I'm not sure about the stakes for her, but when I was reading these lines, I thought about two things. One is that it makes a city kind of a liminal space in itself, in which you're kind of suspended in space and time, and you cannot really, you can move within it, but you cannot necessarily move out of it without some sort of, again, like a gateway or portal. You kind of get suspended in it. And another way in which I thought about it was that cities cannot travel to other cities physically, but they're trying to do it through acquisition of sites. So like, I don't know, certain markets or certain types of buildings that remind you of another city, another culture, another what have you, of kind of building diasporas and specific, again, like ways in which people can congregate and live together. So to me, what it says is that the city, the personification of the city, tries to have that interaction with another city by acquiring something within itself because it cannot go out of itself. That's kind of like my reading of it.
Can you say that? Can you say the last part one more time, Tom?
Yeah. So the city tries to communicate or visit other cities within itself because it cannot go out of itself.
That's great. This was somebody about to pipe up? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say that I also read it stylistically how she's it's like exploration, and it is in a way witty. It's like a postmodern in some ways. I cannot read it all for its meaning. I'm putting all the different parts of the meaning, these glimpses of meaning together in a whole. For instance, when she says well, a word like well, it's like taking it back a little bit. It's all modes of speech that she's exploring in that passage as well. So we cannot just read it for content. We can do it, and we find ways to interpret this, but we should also read it as a whole. For instance, the cursive in except for Paris, that's also a stylistic thing that she uses in the poem, and we notice it. And we wonder why, you know, it kind of brings it out. It's like another emblem, another beautification of what Paris is, flamboyant, you know, what the ladies are who walk in Paris, walks through the arch and standing for something. So these are all explorations that she uses in that stanza.
And at the same time, coming from a very rural area, where generally speaking, I see cities as soulless. Cities are soulless. A city cannot pick up and move. A city cannot interrupt. A city cannot gain culture, except for the fact that to make it bearable, the city, the people within the city, bring in culture to get round that issue. So we would have arches, we would have monuments, we would have theatres, opera, MoMA, we would have the art museums, etc., and all that together brings life to an almost inanimate place, or it would be if it wasn't for this creation of culture. So I don't think that particularly has anything to do with the poem, but it just struck me that without these human seeking of culture, then cities would be pretty desperate places. They haven't got the nature that I've got on my doorstep. Whereas I would miss the culture, but I've got beauty all around me. The city hasn't had that. It's got to create something to make it almost bearable.
So city as a kind of like empty form or something that needs to be populated, which I guess fits a little bit with what Tan was saying about these kinds of diasporic movements where there's a way in which like different cities do come to inhabit each other through the movement of its citizens, because there's something about like the people being crucial to the to the life of the city. So maybe it's not entirely true that a city can't visit another city or something, or maybe that's a kind of like really heady abstract thought. But I think maybe we should just talk about the figure of Paris here. It's interesting that Paris becomes the exception to what Patricia Lockwood has just said. And Paris is, of course, the arch that was the main contender for the arch at the beginning of this poem. So Paris, for some reason, Paris gets a pass here in this like thought experiment about cities visiting other cities. Paris because Paris is a person, and in this poem. Paris, who puts on a hat styled with pigeon wings and walks through the streets of another city and will not even see the sights, too full she is of the sights already. And within her walk her women, and the women of Paris looking like they just walked through an arch. I think that's also a rather lovely set of lines. This sort of almost like it's a somewhat familiar image of a kind of flaneuse character. Here it's coming to stand in for Paris, but this embodiment of the city is so full of itself that in a way it's also not visiting the cities that it goes in, right? Like there's something about this idea of the character of Paris coming, say, to Berlin and being like totally in their own space, like with their funky outfit, and just being like, yeah, well, we have the same thing in Paris, and oh yeah, we have an even better archway in Paris, and Paris this and Paris that. Like there's that kind of thing where this character, Paris hasn't even visited where Paris has gone to. So full they are of their own sites. So I'm just wondering like whether this is specific. She means for this to be specific to Paris, or she's just kind of having fun here with the idea of Paris.
I think she means specifically Paris.
Yeah, I think
because
so.
Paris historically has been such a center of like fashion and influence in arts and architecture, in fashion, in language. Like when you read War and Peace, it's like 60-70% French. With like a ton of footnotes being like, hello Russians, this is how you read your book, have fun with that. But at the same time, because it had colonies, so it is very colonial. And in a way, like I interpret it in a way that when Paris comes to another city, it is so full of its own sites. It's so full of already stuff that is stolen and conquered that there is nothing else to do. Like they got everything. And because, you know, especially when you read like some historical literature about Paris and France of that, you know, like 1800s, past and forwards as well, but especially like 1800s, when their influence was also very, very high. They did feel like they were like the leading nation, and Paris, like Parisians especially, did feel like they were like the most attractive city on earth. And of course you had to go and visit, and of course every other city paled in comparison. Like, of course, naturally, this is the Western world. Like, what else would you want? So I think it is specifically about Paris, and there is a lot to me personally about like influence, colonialism, and also like difficult relationships. Because on one hand, Paris is attractive, and the character of Paris is attractive, but on the other hand, there is that difficult relationship with it that is very full of itself, of themselves. It is, you know, it is what it is. It's very complicated. And then kind of coming back to what Mary said a while ago about the poem kind of being metaphorical to mother, I also kind of connected that in a way that the relationship with a mother, one's mother, can be very difficult. It's like one of the most important relationships of your life, but it's also one of the most complicated ones that you will ever have to navigate.
That's I love these readings of the imperial history of a place alongside, you know, what it means when you try to personify something like an imperial history. And what do you know, if Paris were a person, it would be a difficult person for all the reasons that you said. And I think that, yeah, this is fantastic context for going into the sort of reveal of the poem, as it were, that, you know, the arch is in some ways Patricia Lockwood's own mother, or that Patricia Lockwood's mother is personifying all of these things that she's been working through in this poem, and vice versa. These things that she's been working through in the poem are sort of embodying her mother in a way.
One thing that comes to mind to me when we talk about Paris is that it's in the center. And I think that's the significance that Paris has here in the poem, that the mother is the center too. And Paris, I mean, just from its location and also historically, that France was pretty dissociated and only had the capital, but the other regions were pretty much apart from the capital, but still it would gravitate towards that center. And that I think is significant here in the poem, when we bring the mother in. And then also together reading it with the sheltering quality of the ark and the protecting quality of the mother.
Which I think, you know, this leads us into the final stanza, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to, you know, to finish reading this poem, as it were, since time is flying as always. I had a thought, but I have lost it. I think I wanted to say something when what you were just saying, Suzanne, about the centrality of Paris, and I guess maybe there's also this like centripetal, some sort of gravitational force around some of these spaces that she's invoking, right? And that they seem to like suck things into themselves. I mean, Paris here, you have the whole of Paris like sort of becoming embodied in one person who seems to then be embodying everybody else, and everything is kind of getting pulled into this one person, which is, you know, as we started saying a second ago, this is, I mean, if this is how she thinks of her mother, then she's pointing towards some kind of difficult relationship, right? If your mom is, or if you think of your mother, your relationship with your mother, or somebody who's a mother figure or something like that in your life, as being this kind of like this like Paris monumentality, then that's that's hard, right? And for lots of people, those figures, you know, those parents or parental figures become these people of outsized importance, who seem to like pull everything into their wake, all kinds of meaning into their or into not their wake, into their orbit. The way that this flâneuse is doing at the end of this stanza here, so full of the sights, you know, her own sights, and seeming to kind of gather everybody together. And I think, you know, just to lead us into this bit about the mother here in the third stanza, the first part of the second stanza about the cities, the melancholy feeling of a city, or the melancholy fact that a city cannot visit another city. You know, the cities are already personified, and then they get personified further, so we can kind of reverse the personification and say like, okay, so maybe she's talking about people, and there's something sad about a person can't visit another person or something like that. That there's this kind of like barrier that makes it really hard to actually, you know what somebody else is thinking. And I know that this is not what we usually say in ModPo, where there's like a lot more emphasis on like radical intersubjectivity and these kinds of things. And I don't think that Patricia Lockwood is being conservative or anything in anywhere. I don't think it's conservative to say that like maybe she's actually, you know, working through this idea in this poem that it's really hard to know what somebody else is thinking. It's really hard to be a city and visit another city, to be a person, to have your own things, to be sort of preoccupied with your own sights and you know, your own stuff you have going on in your life, and somehow, you know, be able to fully inhabit somebody else's problems and their own things. And so you give away this great door in the air, which maybe is a poem, I don't know. But that leads us into the third stanza. Oh yeah, sorry.
Could we just talk maybe remaining time about that last or second of the last sentence? Oh, no female armpit lovelier than the armpit of the arch, which
Sure.
I had difficulty reading in the context of the poem, because it gets so much to the body all of a sudden, to the living body, to the physical body with all its expressions, and then it gets linked to the geometry of the arc. And it also gets a connotation of being lovely. And of course, comparison as well. So there's so much in that last sentence. I don't want to jump ahead so much, but if you want to read that with me together, that would be really cool.
Let's, for sure. Yeah, let's, we can, you know, approach this stanza in reverse or something, but for sure, I think we can totally start there. She raises her arm to brush my hair. And as we were saying earlier, there's, it seems that the speaker is in the lap of her mother, right? So we have the echo of the lap. She raises her arm to brush my hair. Oh no, female armpit lovelier than the armpit of the arch. And as you were saying, as you were starting to suggest, Susanna, there's, we come back, we come to bodily, you know, matters here. You know, from the gateway arch to the mother's armpit, this real like zooming in. Yeah, does anybody have any thoughts on what this last line is saying or doing? Why this
already explained something to us.
Hmm?
Mary, maybe you could repeat what you said about the final lines, that it was so fantastic.
You're muted, Mary.
I'm muted now, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I took from the lap, Lincoln. She insists on Lincoln lap, which is an alliteration, so it sticks in our head twice, and bring it back to the lap of her mother at the end. So she loops. I see it as looping an arch from the beginning of the poem to the end, and also when she says, it's very interesting. What an underhand gift for an elsewhere, which is another person, to give a door that reminds you you can leave it. So the mother delivers the child, but also in the future, she can leave that mother. But then now she's thinking, but that was a wonderful place to be, to sit on the lap of my mother as she brushed through my hair. No? So it's both things. You can go through having your mother as an arch to the world, and you can also remember how a living monument she is.
That's lovely, and thank you for bringing in those penultimate lines, which I omitted. What an underhand gift for an elsewhere to give. A door that reminds you you can leave it.
Wonderful.
And that gets back to the gift. The city gifts another city an arch, a great a door in the air, and here we have the underhandedness of that gift. A door that reminds you you can leave it. The absolute, those are absolutely beautiful lines. Any thoughts on this?
I have a quick question because not being a native speaker, what does underhand mean? How do you read it, native speakers among us? Give us your readings of underhand.
Does somebody want to chip in? I have a reading of what they might think underhand means here.
I mean, I don't know, it's complicated, right? But I think that if you kind of tie it together, I read it a little bit differently, because I read if the arch is like the mother, and the arch is sad, or it cannot leave itself, it cannot visit other cities. And then there is also a line, so sad she isn't a cross. I read it as a way of like the burden of being a mother and of like isolation a lot of mothers have, of like not being able to escape your own house and being like very busy with the household and the kids and everything, kind of like losing yourself a little bit and not being able to actually visit other people and so on. And so I do kind of wonder about underhand as well, but like underhand to whom? To the mother or to the speaker, right? And it's kind of both in my interpretation, because on one hand, it is an underhand for the speaker because the relationship is difficult, but very important. And so on one hand, you want to leave, you want to have your own life, but on the other hand, that other life then, gets left behind and you can only reminisce about it. It will not be the same anymore. But on the other hand, it is an underhand gift from the mother, and it is an underhand gift for the mother of like, I have raised you and I have done like a relatively okay job, but you haven't died and you're like a full adult human, good job, but you are gonna leave me, and I cannot leave myself. I cannot visit other people necessarily. I cannot like forge new relationships as easily. All I have is like connection to you, my child, who is leaving then. And there's a lot of melancholy to it, I feel like, if you read it that way.
So did I may have misinterpreted the previous lady who was asking about underhand, but I got the impression, perhaps erroneously, that she was asking what the sort of phraseology meant, and if that be the case, if I got that correctly, then underhand is something, generally speaking, in English that's a bit something that's a bit tricky, a little bit nasty, a bit off.
Right, but
that's not the emotion that underhand evokes usually. So it's a gift that isn't particularly great, because in this case it's actually reminding of a door that you can actually leave it. So it is an element of a bit of a backhanded sort of gift.
It's not as forceful as backhanded. It doesn't have the same
no, it isn't.
Full negative connotation.
Yeah. No.
But it also comes out with, it's an underhanded for an elsewhere to give. So somebody that doesn't even have any meaning in my life, why would they give me something like this?
Yeah.
It's not straightforward.
No.
And that's kind of confusing to me, the way she brings the mother in and sitting for the statue, and what all that means. I'm not really sure.
It also kind of gives like a divide between her and the mother, because the mother was given from Ireland to us, like Americans. So she maybe doesn't feel attached to the mother in that moment.
Can you say more about that, Lee? That was a good.
Well, when she thinks back to her younger self, when she's sitting on the lap, and she even refers to the mother as the arch, so she kind of has that childlike connection to the mother, like being brought up, but maybe as an adult doesn't feel it that way anymore. She's more like the symbol of a mother, but not a mother, not my mother, a mother.
It's. I really love what you said there about this kind of becoming symbolic as a mother, in the way that, I don't know, it's making me think of the arch at the beginning, and the way that the facts kind of slide off of it.
Yeah.
This sort of like larger than life quality of or this sort of like monumental quality. Yeah, this. I mean, there's a lot to sort of like button up here at the end of this poem when we've kind of worked through it, and I think we have some pretty compelling interpretations of how Patricia Lockwood is trying to conceive of her relationship with her mother, and so it becomes a very personal poem. But I'm also, I guess, in these remaining minutes, I want to ask if there's a meta poetic reading here. We've started to get at it a little bit with the arches in the poem, the shape of the arch, semantic arches. But can we push that further? Are there like clear meta poetic moments? Is Patricia Lockwood reflecting on what she's doing in the process of this, or is it a poem about her relationship with her mother?
I think she's definitely reflecting, because in the poem she keeps asking herself questions like, am I mixing it up? Am I getting it right? Do I remember correctly? That is what I know. And so she constantly keeps reflecting back on what she's just said. But I'm not sure how metapoetic that is, but what's interesting to me here is that she's writing about various geographical positions without also like leaving her home, just as a city wouldn't.
Right. That's, oh yeah. Without.
So she also isn't leaving her home. So she isn't writing about Paris from Paris. She's writing about Paris from her house. She isn't writing about an arch, going to that arch and writing there. She's writing from like wherever it is she's writing. She's writing about her mother, not from her mother's lap, but from her memory of that.
Sure.
And so that entire poem kind of becomes almost like an exercise in memory, an exercise in travel.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, we have that example on the main syllabus with John Ashbery's instruction manual. This poem of, it's very explicitly like about that process, but I think this is a little bit more embedded here, but you're pulling it out, you're drawing it out well, Ton. Right.
No, that's exactly what I was referencing. Yeah, like it's very much that.
She herself is traveling to these places without, or as George Harrison once said, without looking out of my window, I can see all the places on earth, I think. There's almost like Zen idea here.
Yes, and she's building all these links. An arc, that's also a built link. And she also builds her own links to other monuments, to cities, to is it St. Mary, is it Jesus with the cross and that female statue, links to her mother. She's linking all the time. Right,
linking, yeah. So creating this sort of, back to the semantic arches, right, of kind of leaping between different pillars, kind of creating these connections. I guess I want to maybe push a little bit on this definition of the arch as something that's not a personified monument, something that's not a person, although like the Lincoln Memorial, and something that facts slide off of. And I wonder if there's any way that this poem can be understood as trying to be arch-like in that way. Does
I
this
think
poem want to be an arch, or does it want to be the Lincoln Memorial?
I think it works on that arch quality. When you look at the word arch, that it's capitalized very often, most often haven't counted it out. And then you have the A also like shaped like an arch, and for me, it becomes very, very monolithic towards the end. So there's not much you can say. You can't really approach it. You can't get to it completely. And that's what the poem expresses, especially. I mean, there's another line that we hadn't looked at. Don't touch that arch. A boy we know got third-degree burns from touching that arch. So she's replacing arch for something else, like the stove. How does that work? And it's also capitalized, in that context. But I find the harder we try to approach it, the more it pulls itself away. And then I had another thought that you also the sadness when you turn a frown upside down, that kind of motion, the smiley face and the one who's sad, where it looks like an arch. That's also embedded in this poem in some ways.
I like what you said about the distance that the poem seems to keep. Anybody else have any other thoughts on whether this poem is arch-like or if it's statuesque?
Yeah, I like that thing you said about that the facts slide off of it. I really understand what you're pointing to, because it's so contradictory at times. Like a city cannot visit itself except for Paris. So forget everything I've said before. Now we're talking about Paris. Oh, wait, I'm mixing it up. I think it was another female statue. Oh, forget this. Now I'm talking about my mother. It's kind of stream of consciousness. It's yeah, I think it's kind of that first sentence. It could point to the poem and the experience reading it.
For sure.
There's one thing where she says it says my mother sitting for her statue. Now, should that word actually be before her statue, or is her mother actually sitting for her statue?
Sitting as in sitting to have her, as one sits to get one's picture taken, sitting to have her statue made, right?
Or is she sitting before the statue of Mary, say?
Well, I think there's
both.
Well, yeah, does anybody want to have anything to say to that?
I would say it's both. It's sitting in front of statue and also sitting to become a statue, so that somebody can reproduce all parts of that body. As I have a chance to speak, I think it's interesting how it starts of all living monuments, and we said the arch is not a living monument, or in a metaphorical sense it could be something living, but in the end we have a living arch, the armpit of mom, doesn't it?
Right.
An arch.
And there's a way I think that this poem is reversing the logic of monuments in its fascination with the arch. So what's surprising about the poem is that it becomes a poem not about an arch, but about her mother. And she's accomplished this not by sitting down and being like, all right, time to write a poem about my mom, my mother, what can I say? And then going from there, but rather completely reversing that and being like, what is the thing that's least like my mom? An archway, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, for example, and then actually kind of sort of reversing the logic entirely of the signification. So rather than trying to do a portrait of her mom, or, you know, sculpt the statue of her mom, or whatever it is, something that would be like, you know, a work of art that would be monumental to the extent that it's representative of the person, you know, in this sort of narrow idea of representation, or that it contains something of the facts of the person, like, for example, the way that we imagine they looked, or maybe like an object that they held or something, or, you know, the way that lots of statues of people, you know, they're usually pictured with something that's meaningful to their biography. I mean, completely getting away from anything like that, and instead starting with the most abstract, well, not the most, but one of the most abstract of abstract forms, which is the archway, and then kind of getting back into the point that it actually, she's able then to see this form in her mother, and to kind of like bring her mother and all of her corporality into this poem that starts from a completely opposite place. And I think that's a pretty cool move, and one that's like there's lots of like conversation about this with monuments and public art. I mean, very famously with the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., which is a non-representative. It's in fact it's different like waves, and it has to do with it has the names of the soldiers who died, and it's supposed to represent this kind of, you know, the temporality of the tragedy, rather than sort of like signify anything like a triumph or anything. So it has, you know, there's this kind of ongoing conversation about what, you know, monuments do, and you know, whether something representational actually like captures the something true about what you mean to represent, or whether, you know, these kinds of abstract forms actually do a better job, like the Vietnam War Memorial. And so it seems like she's doing something like that here. Any last final thoughts here before we?
Could I say?
Yeah, Mary.
So what I get from what you're saying, the poem is both the lap and the arch.
Sure.
The poem is that. The poem is the monument to her mother. The poem is.
Sure.
I find that very beautiful what you just said, Mary, because when you have the arch and the lab, you're forming a circle. You have the bottom, and you have what comes around.
Ooh.
That was really beautiful.
Very nice. Yeah, that's cool. This cyclical representation, or you know, the two halves here of the lap and the arch. Yeah, that's super cool. The cradle and
the cradle and the cradle.
Any other final thoughts on this?
It was kind of cool how she worked through personification, and how she started with something that is not personifiable and then tried to give it more and more corporal form. And it kind of goes gradually from the arch that isn't personifiable. Then she goes to Lincoln, who was a person, but that is also a statue still. Then she goes to Paris and gives it kind of a vague idea of a person. Like, let's imagine Paris is a person. How does it look like? You know, I have an idea, but we all will have different ideas. It's still kind of not corporal enough. It's not embodied enough. It's still kind of like, you know, vague at the edges. And then she goes to her mother, and her mother is the most embodied and personified, to the point where she can actually mention her body as it is, which then links back to the arch. And then you can kind of go through the same process over and over and over and over and over again, and kind of read it, you know, from start to finish, and again and again and again. And it's kind of like,
this is, you know, this is so cool, because I've done this poem before, but I never actually, I haven't thought of it in this cyclical way that you, Susanna, and Tan are now like reading this lens through which you're reading the poem. It's super cool. Yeah. This the way that the arch becomes the armpit becomes the arch, that kind of movement. This sort of like cyclical thing that's really, really neat. Actually, it hadn't occurred to me that, the arch and the
But also
line.
this is how you talk, but also I feel like this is how you think a lot about your mother sometimes. Like it starts when you're a kid, you're like, oh, that's my mother. Like a concept of a mom. She's not really a person. That's the role of a mom. Like, what does my mom like? Like, I have no idea when I'm 4.
Right.
I'm 4. I barely know who I am.
Yeah.
And then the older you get, the more almost like real and corporeal she becomes to you as a person, to the point
Yeah.
where you're old enough, you can actually look back and be like, oh, shoot, my mom was actually a real human being when I
Yeah.
was sitting on her lap and like she was brushing my hair and doing whatever. So it's also kind of like an exercise of, I don't know, looking back at a memory from a different angle and realizing that your mom is actually like a person.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, this sort of the in between is the liminality of symbol and person, larger than life, and then just living like completely embodied, having armpits, the the like least exciting, or that's an unfair thing to say, but it's interesting that she does point to the armpit here. It's like it's an anatomical detail. It's not the first thing you think of when you think of people, usually when you're thinking of people for the purposes of writing a poem about them. Cool. Well, I'm gonna stop the video.